Welcome. The American dream of home ownership has been a symbol of prosperity and stability and success for generations. Unfortunately, that dream is becoming increasingly difficult for many Americans to achieve. Major institutional investors such as BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Blackstone have negatively impacted the housing affordability. By purchasing single-family homes in bulk, these firms are making it more challenging for the average American to afford a home or even find affordable rental properties. High home prices, elevated mortgage rates, limited inventory make it increasingly difficult for many Americans to just find anything that they can even live in. It's time to address this crisis and work towards ensuring that the American dream of home ownership is attainable for all, but how? Well, that's what we're going to be examining over the next 2 episodes. And no, we are not speaking with some theorist, but rather someone who has rolled up his sleeves and has boots on the ground making it happen. Mike Kading is the CEO of Norhart. It's a $200 million real estate business with over 250 employees in Minnesota. So right in the middle of it all. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Dov Barron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. Join the movement of deeply curious learners by hitting the subscribe button right now. The Dov Barron Show is not just another podcast, it's your passport to unparalleled insight. Each episode, we feature the wisdom of global leaders, scientists, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, and journalists, from astronauts who've traveled the vastness of space to presidents or candidates trying to make sense of a world on the brink. We dive deep into the most intriguing minds. For the next 2 episodes, our special guest stories and insights will captivate and inspire you. Hit the subscribe button and become part of our global community today. Ladies and gentlemen, turn up the volume and help me welcome our guest for the next 2 episodes, Mike Kading. He is the CEO of Norhart and the man on a mission to solve America's housing shortage by transforming, and this is important, by transforming the way apartments and housing are built and how they're managed. He's also the host of the Zero to Unicorn podcast, Mr. Mike Kading. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you here. It's very exciting. You and I have had some really great conversations in the past. Thank you for having me on your podcast. As I mentioned to the listeners just now, Zero to Unicorn, great show. You're a great host. I want people to have a sense of you before anything else. And what I mean by that is, because we spoke about it before, my whole specialty is in the emotional source code. So what is the context of the formative years of your life that would, the context of your emotional source code that would tell us who you are a little bit and sort of give us a little bit of breeding ground there?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I grew up in this world with real estate. My parents started this business, so I was on sites, sweeping, flattening nails, helping clean things up. In fact, there's actually pictures of in cribs on a construction site. I'm not sure if that's entirely illegal, but this is the psyche. This is what I'm living with growing up. My parents lost everything. In fact, my dad was kidnapped in Peru, and we eventually climbed it back out of that, and eventually I went off to school, went off to college. And the one thing that I knew when I went off to college is that I wanted nothing to do with the family business. And the reason that is I didn't want people to think it was given to me. So I really wrestled with my own ego. But what I realized deep down, like the heart of who I am, I want to try to make some kind of meaningful, positive impact in the world. And I realized I could take a couple different paths. I could try something completely new on my own, or I could put my ego aside and start with this small business and grow to something that can have that kind of impact. So I jumped in and joined my family business, and my dad and I were like 2 peas in a pod. We worked great together for the first few years, and then suddenly and unexpectedly, my dad passed away. And that totally rocked my world. In fact, in many ways, I was incapable and unready for the whole world of what it was like being a CEO of a small company. But we through it and made it past that, and now I've grown substantially since then.
There's a bit to unpack there, mate.
Yeah.
Let's go back, first of all. So your dad was kidnapped in Peru. So did he already, because you said you lost everything, so I'm not sure where all that glues together, but did he have a business, then got kidnapped, and then lost all the money? Just walk us back to that part first.
Yeah, so my parents were philanthropic. They wanted to help out other people across the world. And my parents were passionate about the Special Olympics. Had some people staying here in Minnesota at the time for the Special Olympics, and they got to this guy named Pancho. And Pancho was from Peru, and Pancho, over a few months of building this relationship, Pancho had this idea. He said in Peru, they didn't have very good public transportation. So if my parents would kind of purchase these buses, send them down to Peru, Pancho would manage that and send them back some money. So it was a philanthropic plus a little bit of a business venture. Of course, they did all of this, and Pancho stopped sending them the money. Eventually, my parents, Pancho, all the way to the Peruvian Supreme Court, ended up losing the court because of some corruption in the court. But one of the trips down there, my dad was walking along the beach. And this guy came running up to him and said, "Dude, you're an American. Tell me all about what it's like to be an American." He was going kind of crazy. And then all of a sudden, as fast as he showed up, he disappeared. Dad thought that was a bit strange. Anyway, just kept walking along the beach when two uniformed police officers show up. They said, "That guy you were just talking to is a known drug dealer. And now we need to take you downtown for questioning." So he started walking with the police officers to their car. He got into the back seat, this small two-door car, and two more people showed up. So there's four people in the car and him in the back middle.
Whoa.
The moment he got in that car, he realized that these weren't real police officers. So they started heading to the bad part of town, and they started asking him, like, "Do you have money?" He's showing him his coat, his socks, pulling his shoes off, showing everything. "I don't have anything." And he knew he had to find a way to escape. We formulated this plan in his mind and thought, as we start to slow down, once we get to 15 miles an hour, I'm going to execute on my plan. So going 50 miles an hour, 40, 30, 20, down to 15. The moment it hits 15, as I slow down for a stoplight, he executes and jumps out from the back middle, across the passenger in the passenger seat, opens the door, lets the momentum of the slowing car whip the car door open as he jumps out and runs backwards down traffic to escape.
What?
So that was my dad getting kidnapped in Peru. Yeah.
Are they making a movie about your dad? Like, what was his special training? Like, anybody else is caught in that situation, I'm done. I'm sandwiched between these two blokes. There's two in the front. It's only a two-door. I'm done. Was your dad special ops? What was his background? And it's
Not at all. He was just he was an electrical engineer and just understood science, although he did look like the kind of guy you wanted to mug. He was that typical American, like, clueless guy look to him, and he'd actually been mugged 3 times over the course of his life, so he kind of understood the dynamics of it.
Wow. And this is while they're down there trying to help people.
Yeah.
Wow. Were you a kid? When did that happen?
Yeah, I was like 5 or 6 years old.
Were you with your mom somewhere in Peru?
Yeah. No, we were at home. But yeah, it kind of rocked my world to know that I didn't really understand before that point that there existed people that wanted to do bad things to, and it kind of shook some of my trust in humanity.
Did that change your mom and dad's way of looking at philanthropy?
I mean, the short answer is no, and it kind of surprised me because I've had some philanthropic things that I've done throughout the years that I kind of go back and regret because people took advantage of the situation, and it made me question philanthropic activities. But my parents had such a genuine heart that they just wanted to support and serve people out there. So they ended up putting, throughout their lifetime, like 200 kids in third world countries through college. And so it never stopped their passion for supporting others.
That is amazing. What amazing human beings. Because a lot of people would say, "Oh, that's it. I've tried to do good in the world. These bastards will take you. Might as well just live for yourself." That really speaks to me about the integrity of who they were. And that's what's interesting to me. Are you an only child, Mike?
No, I got one younger brother.
Okay. Because we talked about emotional source code at the beginning and the dynamic you grow up in. And so growing up with these people who are so philanthropic, who are really making a difference in the world, who go through some pretty challenging situations. You said you got mugged 3 times. How did that impact you being around that? You said you're a baby in a crib on building sites. That's one set of environments. And then there's this other that's so deeply philanthropic. Do you recognize how that impacted you, their way of being?
On one hand, I mentioned I lost a little bit of faith in humanity because of the challenges that exist out there. But the other hand is it gave me a deep-rooted sense how good of people they were. They worked to support and serve the community. They obviously supported us as kids. I had a great, growing up as a kid. And also gave me a role model of what it really looks like to be a person of integrity, to do what you say you're going to do, and really follow through and try to support the wider world.
So you talked about going off to college. You said you were on the building sites from being a little kid. Then you go off to college and you don't want to be in the family business. And I can totally understand. I actually work with a lot of family business people, and that next generation, it's difficult because you're in the shadow of the previous generation. And a lot of people look at you and exactly what you just said. Sure, you're the boss, but it got handed to you. You didn't really have to work for it. So I totally understand that motivation to do something else. Were you on a path to do something else when your dad passed?
Right after college is when I strongly considered going elsewhere. I have a degree in computer science, a minor in mathematics and management, and I was really passionate. I was joining a bunch of small businesses. One was a fruit share company that delivered fruit directly, organic fruit directly to your home. Another one was a toy company, actually. And I remember one day really explicitly sitting down with my dad, and I said, real estate is easy. I mean, where your income's coming from. It's just a standard cash flow. I want to do something more impressive with my life. And I think that really kind of profound negative impact on my dad at that time. But it took me a little bit of coming around as I realized real estate isn't anything but easy, especially if you're working to solve housing affordability. It's incredibly hard. And I think for me, more than anything that shifted my view was that, am I here for my ego or am I here for impact? And if I'm here for my ego, I should not do the family business. I should go do something else just to prove to myself I can do it. But if I'm here for impact, why not take the unfair advantage that I have in life, being able to start with this small business and the experience I had growing up to leverage what I can do in the short number of years I have here on earth? And it took me about a year of really wrestling with this and battling with it before I kind of let it go and said, I guess I don't care what people think. I just want to make that impact.
Norhart. So that was the company your dad started. That's right, is it? Yeah. So your dad started that company.
It was named differently,
Sure.
but it was the same company.
But you didn't actually come into it until after your dad passed. Is that correct? I want to make sure I understand that.
No, my dad and I worked together for the first few years after college.
So you came into it and you said, why not step into this? Okay. But that's very different than suddenly having the weight of it on your shoulders when your dad passes. And there's 2 things here that I want people to think about and be considerate of, which is you've now got this business with a bunch of employees and a whole lot of responsibility. And you've also got the grief of your father passed. And your father wasn't very old, was he?
No.
So can you walk us through a little bit of that? Because that's a juggling act emotionally in and of itself.
Yeah, because he had a brain tumor that caused a stroke. He did live for a little while, but on the order of months. But we essentially lost him on one day.
Wow.
And I remember that all happened on Saturday. And the next Monday, I had to go back and run the company.
Wow.
So there's literally no time to grieve. We had some projects we were working on during that time. In fact, I can remember the day that he was having the stroke, my mom called me and I raced home because my dad wasn't willing to go to the hospital. Something was off with him. He just wasn't himself. I remember at one point walking into the pantry, shutting the door, just this little room with food, and I just started bawling because I knew in that moment I lost my dad forever.
Oh my God.
And it was really tough on the emotional side. But then the flip side is to come to work put that aside and execute the things that needed to get done. Because if we weren't going to execute well, we could go out as a business. And so it was a really hard transition. Then I would say after that too, there was other challenges we faced. For example, we were getting in this project passed called Amberwood Apartments. And the city council was already a little bit leery about me because I hadn't learned some important lessons about building relationships with people. Anyway, once my dad had passed, they really questioned if I could do it. In fact, they shut me down once, and then they shut me down a second time. The second time they shut me down, they pulled me into their city offices, and I'll never forget this. They sat me down and said, "Mike, we don't believe that you can do this."
What?
You were shut down until you could hire someone to kind of fill that project manager role for you. I raced to find someone in just 3 days, which is a terrible way to hire someone. That was a whole challenge in and of itself. And then over the next 6-9 months, we had to deliver. And I remember just a month or two before we were supposed to open, we found a pinhole water leak in this 1,500-foot-long pipe buried 15 feet in the ground. Somewhere in that line, we had no idea where. So I was out there day after day from sunrise to sunset with the excavator, pleading him to stay out there in my nice clothes, shoveling, looking for this pinhole water leak. Eventually we find it, and just a few days before we were supposed to open, the city staff comes out and says, "Mike, there is no way you're opening this building." And I look at them and say, "What? Like, I've got families that are about to move in. Where am I supposed to send them?" We worked through the night, multiple days in a row. And the last day, about a half a dozen inspectors come out for a half-a-day inspection. And at the end of the inspection, the head building official pulls me aside in the parking garage and says, "Mike, I know we were hard on you, but honestly, looking at this today, this is the nicest project that we've opened in this city."
Wow.
It's like, finally, it was that moment, like for all this time, I didn't believe in myself. But finally having someone of authority actually stepping alongside of me and saying, "Mike, you can do this," that was a huge transition for me.
So that gets you sort of the validation of it. We talked about Noha as this company, and you're building houses. And like I mentioned in the introduction, you have a much bigger mission, and that's to solve America's housing shortage by transforming the way apartments are built and managed. I talked about home ownership earlier, but it's not just home ownership. It's rentals. Like, people can't find places to rent because of these large conglomerate companies, these investor companies who are just buying in bulk. Talk to us about that mission, because I find that particularly fascinating, because you are, as I said, you're the boots on the ground, the rolled up the sleeves guy. Talk to us about that. How did that come to be your mission, and why? For me, at the core, I want to make some kind of meaningful, positive impact. When I tied that kind of view on life to what our skill sets were, what our unique advantages were, I started to realize the thing that we could do differently is to really drive down the cost of construction. In fact, if you look at a variety of industries like manufacturing, over the past 60 years, they've improved labor productivity by 760%. Agriculture's improved it by 1,500%. Wow.
During that same time period, construction has done virtually nothing, growing just 10% in their productivity. And I looked at the projects we were doing, and we were having massive impacts on productivity. In fact, we were improving or lowering our overall costs by 20 to 30%. And eventually we think we can get to 50%. But imagine what that means. That means someday your mortgage could be half, or your rent could be half. And the way that we actually can achieve that is by producing more units to a market, scaling up that production, producing so many units to a given market that pricing starts coming down. And here's the key. It's not just for our own residents. It's for everyone in the markets that we're serving. I'll mention one last thing, is that many people look at affordable housing. The way you solve that is by bringing in government financing to bridge that gap. Mm-hmm. But the problem is housing is such a huge part of the economy, You can't pull enough money from other parts of the economy into housing to solve it.
No.
The only way you can solve it is by driving down those construction costs and scaling up production. And that's what we're really trying to do.
That opens a big question, was like, well, if nobody's done that, what is your magic wand? What is your secret, dude? And where can we get one of those lemons to rub? Right? Because it seems purely just greed that nobody's bothered. Or is it something else? Help us out here, because this is a major issue.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why it hasn't happened. I would say the first is that the world of construction, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but the world of construction isn't typically the place that the brightest and the smartest people of society want to jump into. Maybe when you think of that, you may think of banking or tech or AI. Construction, that feels like a backwards kind of environment. So that's one of the issues and the reason it's been this way. Another one is for those people in those positions, they have this kind of mindset of, this is the way my great-granddad has done it. This is the way my granddad has done it. And by golly, this is the way that I am going to do it.
Right.
And so there's this incredible inertia of following the way things have always been done, especially when they're making a ton of money.
Right.
One of my attorneys I met with recently, he pulled me aside and said, Mike, I work with a lot of real estate companies. You're the first and only that I've ever worked with that every term, we're trying to do something totally radically different. And the heart of it, the way we actually solve this, the magic wand that comes into play is we're not creating anything new. All we're doing is we're stealing the lessons learned from other industries. The big one being manufacturing, right? Manufacturing has improved in things incredibly. And so we looked at who in the world of manufacturing is doing things the very best. And one of those is Toyota. In fact, they invented the world of lean manufacturing and the whole concept of lean. We just reached out to them and we've decided to partner together. So they actually send their executives to us on a regular basis to apply lean principles to the world of construction. But I'll give you a little bit of a sense of it. One of the big challenges in the world of construction, too, is that it's very disparate. There's a bunch of different companies that come together to work on one project and they all leave. We brought all of that work under one roof. Imagine for a moment if a construction company were to produce cars. You'd have a different company installing the windshield, a different company installing the door, and a different company installing the wheel. Then, of course, the wheel company, they would call you up and say, hey, I'm so sorry, I got delayed in another project, and now I can't get out there for 2 weeks. Your line would be shut down. See, manufacturing looks at us and says, you are crazy. And we respond with, that's the way it's always been done.
Right.
And so we just don't want to accept that anymore. We want to change that world.
I love that. I mean, I'm often brought in to work with companies having challenges getting people to innovate. And I'm like, are you really having a challenge with having people innovate, or are you having a problem innovating? And they're like, well, we think we're pretty innovating. And I said, here's what you need to understand about innovation. Innovation is a destructive process. You must destroy what you've done before in order to actually innovate. What you're calling innovation is usually a tweak and not really a real change, because you've got to burn it down in order to have something new. And what most people would never know about me is I worked construction for a while. It wasn't a good thing, but I did do it. I worked on the Toronto subway when I first moved to Canada, and I worked on the Toronto subway, and my only recommendation is don't go in that station, because it might not be safe. But I was fascinated by what you just said, is that people would come in and do things who were these subcontractors, and I have buddies in the renovation business and in the housing business who say, I can't get the plasterers to come in, I can't get the electricians to come in, or the plumbers are late, and so we have to hold up on the tiling. Or everybody is sort of on everybody else's timeline, and delays are inevitable. So what I find really fascinating, Mike, is that you were willing to burn it down. The model of this is the way it's always done. So did you put everybody under your roof and say, okay, now you're a plumber who works for our company, you're an electrician who works for us? Because a lot of companies don't want to do that because they don't want to have all that responsibility. So it's like, yeah, that would be more efficient, but it would also be more expensive for us or more risk involved for us.
And that's true. So we did bring all of that work under one roof. We have plumbers, electricians, HVAC. We have supply chain. We have architects and engineers. We have wall panel manufacturing. We have precast concrete. We have literally the entire spectrum under one roof, and it's incredibly risky. It's terrifying. But if you want to radically improve stuff, you've got to take on some risk to do that. Once we bring all of this work under one roof, we can start applying techniques that really no one else can. And one revolutionary technique is the assembly line. I know, it's not that revolutionary, but how in the world can you take a building and drive it down a line? Well, you can't, not like a car or a product. But what you can do is you can take the person and move them through the building. So right now within our projects, every 5 hours, every team shifts through the building by basically one unit. So if you look at the end of our building, every 5 hours, we have a brand new apartment unit completed, which is crazy because the other end of our building is just dirt.
Wow.
By doing this one technique, you can drive down the time to complete a project substantially, maybe from 15 months down to 9. But there's so many techniques that we can start applying, like talked about innovation. We talked a lot about making many little 2-second improvements. There's no like one magical wand that solves everything. It's 10,000 little things that you need to solve. And part of that is making sure you hire incredible people, which I could talk a lot about. And then once you do that, you still have to create the right infrastructure and system to enable them to solve those issues. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but when you bring it all together, that's when you start to have meaningful change.
We're almost at the end of part 1 here, and I want to talk more about building those teams, because I know you've done a spectacular job of that, and getting people to embracing innovation. It's one thing to have innovation. You can come up with all the great things in the world. Getting people on board for that is often difficult. So hiring, putting the teams together, integrating that innovation. And I also want to talk to you about, in the second part of the show, I want to talk to you about what this means in this housing crisis situation that we're in, because, sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way, you're just one small firm with 300 million people in the United States. Is it a drop in the ocean? That's the question I want to come back and ask in part 2 of the show. Until then, though, Mike, I want people to find out more about you, find out about your resources, about your company, and of course about your podcast as well. Please tell people where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, the best way is to visit our website, norhart.com. That's NORHART.com. And on there, you can see our shows, including our podcast, Zero to Unicorn, which is about the journey of small business growing to billion-dollar scale and people having major impact in the world.
Fabulous. You can check out all of that. We will make sure, of course, that we have all the links in the show notes, so please check it out. We're going to be back in just one click for part 2 of the show. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can embrace innovation and have the courage to do so, because it means burning things down to the ground to make a massive difference. Not just for you, but potentially for humanity. We'll be back in one click.